Some swords are big, some swords are small. This one's nearly as long as I'm tall. But look at the blade, it's really cool. It's not lame because the pattern flickers like a flame. Today, we're going to talk a bit about Flamberge. Hello everyone, Lauren back with you, and today we're going to talk about montante, spadone, Zweihander, doppelhander, a bigger boy, a giant sword. That's right, we're going to talk about this big, great sword, but not how to use it. That's for a different video. Today I specifically wanted to do a mini lecture talking about flamberge, or this pattern of blade. And of course, it might be called flamberge, flame, but we're going to dig into it a little bit. I did some research, did some looking around, reading a few different opinions, some really good stuff, some kind of, common misconceptions that still persist. But we'll talk about this type of sword. So of course, briefly, this type of sword, and we're going to call it montante because this is from Black Fencer. Yes, it's a synthetic because that's affordable rather than an actual steel one. Besides, what am I going to use this steel montante for? A big, great two-handed sword with a steel blade. Just a training one is all I really need for the practice because I'm trying to learn how to use it because it's new to me. But anyway, montante. Very long grip. The hilt is very long. Set stopper kind of pommel. We have extra rings for extra hand protection. Very long pullins on the cross guard. Curled up. Nice shape. It's a little fancy. We have, sometimes these are called parrying hooks. I just call them lugs. Little protrusions on the blade. Extra place to catch opposing blades and protect your hands so you're not too close. So pretty good. But of course on this model, the rare occurrence of the flamberge, the undulating pattern that looks like a flickering flame. And where does that come from? Well, it doesn't originally mean a flickering curvy blade pattern. Oldest references going back, well, probably about 1200 years. Flamberge just means big sword, or it can just be bright, shiny sword. It doesn't necessarily have that connotation, but looking at flamberge, flamberge as an old French word, it can mean fire, or it can mean burn, or bright. So it could just be a really shiny blade, or it could be that it's, referring to the process of forging a big sword in the fire of the forge. That may be where originally these little references come from. But, of course, flamme, flame, and we get this pattern. And it's not just on big, giant swords. Now this here, which sometimes has the nickname A Bigga Boy, that's for Eric Vulgaris and all my friends from the Discord there. I hope you're all doing well. This really big sword, it could also be on a rapier. There are rapier blades that are undulating, wavy, flamberge. Now, it's not hugely common, and so obviously we see lots of rapiers that are just a normal straight blade, and we see lots of big two-handed swords that are also just straight bladed. So what would be the purpose of this? So we know that maybe this name doesn't come directly from the oldest reference of why the swords have the shape, but we call it a flame blade if you want. Flaming sword, Flammenschwert. A lot of different little names that go on, and people will say, oh, it's to increase the surface area so it cuts through the heads of the pikes, it cuts through the wood. And it probably doesn't. I don't think it's going to work. If I had a sharp one, I'd definitely try to hack through a staff, but whether it's ash or even if it's modern day maple, trying to hack through an inch and a quarter of a wooden shaft for a pole arm, the way the grain of the wood works, you're not going to be able to just cut through it. And you can't saw because it's not sawtooth, it's smooth. So what do we think that this is for? Well, if I put the sword here, we think that maybe it's to help with the bind. So some of the things that I've been looking at, Arms and Armor had a really good blog about this from last April, so about a year ago. But yeah, we can see that maybe it's to help with the bind. So rather than cutting through things, it's going to help catch the opposing blade. And in catching the opposing blade or the haft of the weapon, one, bump, 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 bump. Maybe it's giving some vibrational feedback to it. Or maybe it's just, it helps you in the bind. It helps you catch. But then, of course, the opposing weapon also has a place to bind and can bind back just as well against you. But there's that theory. So that theory as to why blades have this flame pattern is because it'll help bind the opposing weapons. And that makes sense. If we see it on rapiers, well, what do you do in rapier? Well, you need to bind, control the opposing blade, and thrust. Not necessarily cuts. You know, there are small cuts you do with rapier, but you don't do big shearing cuts with the rapier. Rapier has a distinct advantage for the slender blade profile, for thrusts, and if you had a flamberge, if you had a wavy undulating blade, well, there you go. You're helping to bind against an opposing blade. But like I said, it's not seen as that common, so obviously, if it works, but it can also be a detriment where the opponent is kind of caught inside of the wave pattern, maybe it can't be quite as effective. But I can see how it would work to catch and push aside, you know, a pike that's thrusting at you. But another thing that we use these big montantes and spadones and great swords things for are defending a space. So one person against multiple people, someone with a really big sword versus people with smaller arms and armor or spears, pikes coming forward, and being able to defend that space with big motions of the sword. So having these undulations on the blade can help us understand, oh yeah, well, you're trying to knock that blade aside, do big cuts, try and use the force to take opposing weapons out of the way, maybe even knock them out of hand. People are rushing forward, especially if they have, you know, a smaller sword. They're using more of the arming swords at the time, or side swords, because this is very 16th century design, and that's where we see it, and particularly with Landsknechts, the German area mercenaries. We can't say German specific because Germany is more of a, you know, cultural and language, but not necessarily a country. Specifically, there are lots of regions. There's the Holy Roman Empire. We won't get into that. But point being, the 16th century sword, and we say, oh yeah, it's used against pike formations. Well, sure. But probably not to go and cut through all of the pikes. Right? We don't have any evidence for that, and if I had a sharp one, I'd certainly be willing to test it out, because I do want to do more experiments now that the weather is finally nicer. I have to make a little bit more space outside, and I can do that. But this idea, this flamberge that we talk about, this flame, does it originally just mean that it's a bright, shiny sword that kind of shines like a flame? Could be. That's my theory. But it comes in this flame style because, of course, it looks a little bit like a flickering, wavy flame, but not really that much. So, what else could it mean? Well, I think it also means flamboyant. Flamboyant. Showy. You're showing off. This kind of blade takes more work to make. This isn't as easy as just making a straight blade. You have to make these nice undulations, this nice twisting in the blade, while still maintaining a straight center. And of course, this has a fuller just for reducing the weight, but the blade may not have that, but it has to still be a straight center line, and you have to forge and grind in everything. So there's a lot of work, more than just a straight blade would have in order to make this. So by having it, you're definitely showing off. And if we look at Landsknecht mercenaries using this, and often called double soldier, because they can get double pay, and they're using two-handed swords, you can imagine that they're spending more on their equipment. And it's not just their uniforms, not just the color and the design and the slashes and the decks, all the things in their clothing, and bits of armor highly polished, and fancy weapons really well forged. And you can see that it's really a status symbol. This costs more to make, so you're using it in battle. You're saying, hey, I've been very successful, look at me, be afraid of me, because I'm obviously good at this. and I can afford all this fancy gear. It's psychological warfare. Psychology plays a big part in battles going back more thousands of years than we probably even realize. So yeah, we can see how having this sword, as much as it's useful, it's also showy. It's really cool. You look at it and you go, yeah, I really like it. This sword really makes a statement. Yes, it does. And the same thing if we were looking at the rapiers that have those kind of blades. Those are going to have a little bit more effort in order to make those blades, so they're going to cost more. So they are definitely a status symbol. They're flamboyant. You're showing off your fancy things. Now, of course, swords like this, montante here, you wouldn't, if it were a steel one, you still wouldn't have a scabbard. Now, if it's a flame type blade, it's really tough to get a scabbard onto this. It's going to be really thick, but it has to then somehow secure or tie onto there. And what are you going to use it for anyway? I mean, just to keep the rain off. Because carrying this, you're going to carry it over your shoulder. You might carry it like that. You might carry it with the blade back like that. But of course, you might hit someone else. So if you're carrying it with the blade down, and you've got your hand up here, and it's just resting on the lugs, and you're carrying it around like that, that could be a way. Or you could just be carrying it like that, as long as it's up high enough that it doesn't hit the person behind you, because this is at least 160 centimeters in length, the total. I'm 167 centimeters in height total, so it's almost as tall as me. So this thing almost as big as me. It's really cool. It's fun to swing, but I want to talk specifically today about this Flamberge because I've been really curious about it in the last couple of weeks, and I figured just sharing some of the things that I found about it with you might be a lot of fun. And then hopefully in the next week or two we can get outside and talk a little bit more about using this, because how you use this, it's a little bit different from a longsword, certainly. You have to be really careful. You can hit yourself in the head with this, and yes, that's exactly what I did the first time I tried to use this after I bought it. So yeah, don't hit yourself in the head. So we'll look at those techniques. And incidentally, my shirt, my tank top is ladylike behavior, and there's a picture of a lady defending a castle, and she's cleaving some guy with a sword. So just in case you were curious, it's a little tough to see. It's pretty old and faded, but it's a nice day out, so I wanted to dress light and comfortable. Alright, so we had a quick look, a little mini lecture discussion on Flamberge. Is it flame? Is it flamboyant? Probably a bit of both. It's not going to cut through things the way we think, but it is very useful for binding your opponent's weapons, but then can be slightly detrimental because it also allows them to help bind you. But it looks really cool, makes a great statement, and this montante, a bigger boy here, is a lot of fun to use. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. I hope that you're having a fantastic day. Do remember to like, subscribe, comments if you want to see other things for video, for content. Remember, this is as much about you telling me what you would like to see as me researching the things that I want. So together, we make this a much better channel. And we're almost at 350 subscribers. What are we, 10 or 11 away from that? So we're getting very close to another little milestone. I want to thank you very much for all of that. Do take care, do stay safe, and we'll see you again next time.